Okay, well, let's begin. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are really excited to have our special guest, Christine Van Geyn, with us tonight. We look forward to hearing from her, but first, a few notices from FTC. We want to first of all thank our members for their ongoing support. Your support is critical to our functioning and our ability to do the things that we do. And I encourage any attendees who are not members, if you are not, to please join us and become a member. Also support FTC's social media presence, which is quite varied. We have a Facebook channel that you can post, like, comment, and share. We have a YouTube channel. Hit the subscribe button and like us. This sends a signal to the YouTube algorithm to recommend more of our content to you. And we're also on Rumble, so please check us out on those places. Take a listen to FTC's podcast on Substack and Spotify, and subscribe to our Substack bi-monthly posts. Also visit freedomdefensecanada.com and comment on our blog. FTC is a forum for conservative and Christian voices, so please join us and make your voice part of the larger voice of Canadians who are concerned for the direction of our nation. We are going to have a Q&A session after the presentation. So let me explain a little bit of Zoom etiquette in order to create an atmosphere of respect. We had asked that you mute your mic during the presentation so that Christine will not be interrupted by our voices. And after the presentation, Perry will come on and give us some more information about the Q&A session, so we can look forward to that. So at this time, we will introduce Christine to our members. There she is. All right, let me introduce Christine for you in some fashion here. Christine is a Canadian lawyer who has been the litigation director of the Canadian Constitution Foundation since 2020. She is a best-selling author and host of the national broadcast television program, Canadian Justice. Christine earned her undergraduate degree in political science and ethics, society, and law at the University of Toronto, Trinity College. She also earned her professional law degree at Osgoode Hall Law School and also studied at New York University School of Law. Among a host of other things, Christine is a podcaster, a YouTuber, and a professional speaker. So, Christine, we're very grateful that you can join us and made the time to do so. It's rather late for you, so we're especially thankful for that. So welcome, and if there's anything else you want to share, please feel free. If there's anything of interest, the floor is yours. So go ahead, Christine.
Yeah, thanks so much for inviting me today, Mike. Today, I'm going to give a talk about a really classic tension that we see in politics, in law, kind of this tension that we are all familiar with between safety and liberty. And I want to talk about when governments use fear as a weapon to erode freedom. So there's a really simple but powerful truth that I think we all are aware of, which is that civil liberties are the foundation of a free society. They are what protect each of us from unchecked state power. They guarantee our ability to speak freely, to think independently, to worship as we choose, to protest when we disagree, and to live according to our own values without fear of punishment. And these are not luxuries, these freedoms. They are the scaffolding that allow a free people to flourish. But throughout history, governments have found ways to chip away at these freedoms, and they often do so in the name of something that we all value, which is safety. The Austrian philosopher Friedrich Hayek warned us back in 1979 that emergencies have always been the pretext on which the safeguards of liberty have been eroded. And in 2018, there was this very famous book written by American psychologist, professor at NYU, where I did part of my degree, named Jonathan Haidt, and by lawyer Greg Lukianoff, called The Coddling of the American Mind. And it gave us a word for this phenomenon, this mindset, and it's called safetyism. It's the belief that safety should be prioritized above all else, even at the cost of freedom, personal development, or open debate. And here in Canada, we see this time and again. We have seen safetyism used as a justification for government overreach in countless instances. I actually recently released a report about this phenomenon in Canada's history. It's called Safety Above All. And you can download a free copy of the report if you want to read it. I'm going to talk about some of the things I explore in the report. It's available for free at the ccf.ca/safetyism. So I'm going to walk you through some of the really striking examples in Canadian history, but also in the current moment that we're all living through right now, so that we can see this pattern of safety and fear eroding liberty and freedom in a really clear way. And it will help us understand why this mindset is so dangerous. So I'll begin with the historic examples of safetyism. And one of the most notorious is one that you'll all be familiar with. It's the October crisis of 1970. Pierre Elliott Trudeau invoked the War Measures Act after the FLQ kidnapped two public figures in Quebec, British diplomat James Cross and Quebec cabinet minister Pierre Laporte. And tragically, Minister Laporte was murdered by the FLQ. His body was found strangled using his Catholic devotional medal that he wore around his neck. He was stuffed into the trunk of a car and left near an airport. Trudeau responded by invoking the War Measures Act. Look, these are terrible things that happen. These are terrible crimes. But the invocation of the War Measures Act is widely now seen as an overreaction. Trudeau at the time claimed that it was needed to prevent the overthrow of the Quebec government. And it was the first and only time during peacetime that the War Measures Act was used, granting the police and military extraordinary powers. Canadians lost habeas corpus, which is the ancient right against imprisonment without charge. Canadians in Quebec were jailed without evidence. Homes were raided, books and personal property were seized. Hundreds of innocent people, artists, activists, journalists, intellectuals, they were locked up despite no connection to any violent plot or association with the FLQ. The government all claimed that this was necessary for public safety, but in reality, it was a massive overreach. It trampled civil liberties under the guise of security, and around 450 citizens were jailed, most of whom had no connection at all to the FLQ. Ultimately, only 18 people were convicted, and of those, 16 were convicted of ordinary criminal code charges. In 1980, following an inquiry into what happened with the FLQ, it was found that there were at the time that this happened, only 35 actually active members in the FLQ, so hardly a group capable of overthrowing the government. Obviously, the criminal code needed to be used to respond to these terrible crimes, but not the invocation of this extraordinary wartime legislation. Safety became an excuse. The use of that law was not justified. There was real danger, but not warranting this incident. And this remains one of our most controversial examples of overreach in the name of safety. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of sacrificing civil liberties in the name of national security. But if you fast forward to 2022, we see that the Trudeaus did not learn any lessons from that incident. Justin Trudeau, Pierre's son, invoked the Emergencies Act during the Freedom Convoy protests, which were, as I'm sure you all remember, these noisy and disruptive protests in downtown Ottawa and at some border locations, all related to COVID-era restrictions. The historic parallel between both Trudeaus using these laws is shocking because the Emergencies Act is what replaced the War Measures Act after that legislation was abused. It was created with an intentionally higher and clearer threshold in order to prevent that type of abuse. But Justin Jr., or Trudeau Jr., just blew past all of those limits. Bank accounts were frozen without warrants. Peaceful assemblies were prohibited, yet Canada's own spy agency, CSIS, stated that there was no threat to the security of Canada, which is required under the Emergencies Act to invoke for a public order emergency. We obviously challenged this law at the Canadian Constitution Foundation. And in January of 2024, the federal court released its decision in our challenge to the use of the Emergencies Act. The court held that the government had not met the legal threshold and that the use of the Emergencies Act and the prohibition on gatherings and the freezings of bank accounts, that those were all illegal, that it violated Canadians' charter rights to freedom of expression and to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures. That is under appeal now, but at the federal court held that those measures were not demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So in both cases, safety was the excuse and liberty was the casualty. If you go back even further to one of the most shameful chapters of Canada's civil liberties history, in 1942, following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, more than 22,000 Japanese Canadians, three-quarters of them citizens, were uprooted from their homes and sent to internment camps. Families were separated, men were sent to labor camps, property was seized and sold, and this was all done in the name of national security and safety. The War Measures Act was the law that was used. This was a wartime invocation of the War Measures Act, though, to distinguish it from when Pierre Elliott Trudeau used it. And it provided legal cover to suspend civil liberties of Japanese Canadians and to take extraordinary and wildly discriminatory actions against them in the name of national security, even though there was no evidence that these individuals actually posed a threat. The chiefs of the Canadian Army and the Navy actually denied that Japanese Canadians posed a danger. It was racism and fear dressed up as safety. And of course, we all saw safetyism really rear its head during the COVID-19 pandemic. Places of worship were shuttered, protests were banned unless it was on a topic that the government wanted you to protest about. In Ontario, police were briefly given the power to stop anyone on the street and demand identification without cause. Vaccine mandates cost people their jobs. Families were told not to gather in their own homes, either for holidays or to mourn their dead. And some of these restrictions were later struck down in court, but others simply expired before they could even be challenged. But all of them really revealed how quickly governments expand their powers when fear takes hold and how reluctant they are to relinquish those powers once a crisis ends. And these are not isolated incidents. You can look at other examples of where safety was used to deny rights. We have civil forfeiture laws that allow the state to seize property without criminal conviction, including the property of innocent third parties, which flips the presumption of innocence on its head, which the government claims is necessary to keep us safe from criminal enterprises. We saw the G20 summit in Toronto, where police carried out the largest mass arrest in Canadian history, where they kettled and detained hundreds of peaceful protesters. We see bubble zone laws that silence protests across Canada, not just outside of abortion clinics, but also they prohibit protests now near schools, libraries, and places of worship. Provinces actually use the rationale of health and safety to hide protectionist policies and undermine free movement and free enterprise of goods. Police engage in policies like carding and random traffic stops, again, defended as safety measures, but which disproportionately target Black and Indigenous Canadians and actually erodes trust in law enforcement. And we had, after 9/11, these security certificates that allowed people to be detained and deported on secret evidence that they were not allowed to see or challenge, all in the name of national security. So each of these examples shows a pattern. Governments claim they're keeping us safe, but what they're really doing is violating civil liberties and taking away some of our fundamental freedoms. These historic examples matter because the trend is accelerating in the present day. We're involved in litigation right now in Nova Scotia where a few months ago, the entire province's forests were deemed off limits due to dry conditions. On August 5th, Premier Tim Houston in Nova Scotia announced a sweeping and irrational measure, a province-wide ban on entering the woods until October 15th. You're clear now to enter the woods in Nova Scotia. But this was done under the Forests Act, but it prohibited hiking, fishing, bird walking, dog walking, picnicking, or even inviting family onto private forested land. And it could result in fines of $25,000 plus processing fees. The rationale for this ban on entering the woods was elevated wildfire risk. And yes, of course, I know a lot of you are based in British Columbia. Wildfires are devastating. They are dangerous. You know this. Burn bans make sense when the conditions are dangerous. Vehicle bans make sense. There's rationale there. A hot exhaust pipe can, on an ATV, for example, can ignite dry leaves. But and it makes sense to prohibit access to places where there is active fire or firefighting going on. But a blanket ban on walking or having a picnic across the entire province is obviously disproportionate and irrational. Walking does not cause fires. Banning Canadians from enjoying Crown land or even their private land in this way is overreach, and it's all disguised as safety. I mean, if you compare the approach taken in Nova Scotia to the approach taken in British Columbia, it's very different. In BC, the approach is precise and targeted and rational. When fires are active, exclusion zones are mapped that show exactly where and what activities are restricted. The public in BC can follow those rules. Nova Scotia, in contrast, has a broad and irrational rule, and it's basically performative panic. And when the public sees that, it actually undermines trust in government rules. People are less likely to follow rules that they don't think make any sense. And as a result, the opposite of is achieved. It actually can erode safety because if people don't believe any of these rules make sense, then they are less likely to actually abide by a burn ban, which does make sense. So another example that you're probably familiar with that more recent is the case of Sean Feucht. Sean Feucht is an American Christian worship singer. He mixes music with some political and social commentary. He has views on abortion and gender identity and COVID policies. His views are conservative. They can sometimes be provocative. He is entitled to those views. They are an expression of his views and his deeply held beliefs. There is nothing remotely criminal about his views. His views are shared by many other people. They do not approach anywhere near Canada's legal threshold for hate speech, which is high and should be high. It's high for now. More on that later because Mark Carney's trying to change that. But, despite the constitutional protections for freedom of speech, several Canadian cities canceled Sean Feucht's public performances, and many of their justifications were health and safety concerns. Some places alleged that they would not be able to ensure the safety in a public park if there were protesters or counter-protesters. Some cities, for example, Quebec City, were very open that it's his viewpoint that they find to be dangerous. They openly canceled his concert, claiming he was a controversial artist. Montreal required a special event permit on extremely short notice in a obvious attempt to block a religious service. And the church that ended up proceeding with that performance was fined $2,500 for allowing it to go ahead without this bureaucratic and unnecessary permit. In any event, blocking these performances in the name of safety is really a classic example of abusing and weaponizing the safety rationale. And the attempt to silence Feucht actually had the opposite of the intended effect of these governments and these politicians because it ended up amplifying his message. It transformed a performance that might have otherwise been, more obscure. He's been to Canada many times with little attention to him. But because of all of this attention and the weaponization of the safety rationale in the name of, protecting people from opinions that might offend them, as a result, he actually received a significant more amount of attention than he otherwise would have. Some other recent examples from things that we're working on, were involved in a case in Mississauga where the city government destroyed a private homeowner's naturalized garden, claiming that the garden was unsafe because it had plants that were tall. It was not a corner lot. No sight lines were involved. They claimed that the garden could create a habitat for pests. So does any wild place, like a meadow or a forest, or my own manicured garden can also house animals. We are also involved in a case out of Kingston where the police flew a high accuracy drone above a traffic stop to use a camera to spy into vehicles, all in the name of keeping people safe from traffic offenses that may be happening inside these cars. They took photos of people's activities inside their vehicles from this drone far above them in the air. We're representing a woman who saw the drone outside her car window and was shocked to see it because it's not something you would expect to see, took out her phone and took a photo of the drone because she thought maybe someone's doing something wrong by flying this drone above cars, and then was given a over $1,000 ticket for using her phone while at a red light. All in the name of keeping people safe, right? The police need this drone to monitor traffic. We are involved in litigation in Niagara Falls, where the city declared an emergency due to a solar eclipse earlier last year. They argued that less than 1 minute of darkness plus a large number of tourists in Niagara Falls, which is a regular feature of the falls, they said that this created an emergency that required them to have special powers to keep the people of Niagara safe from the minute of darkness. The same city, Niagara Falls, also banned signs at city council, claiming that these signs could be used as a weapon and are therefore dangerous. There's another community in South Bruce Peninsula that requires a permit to picket on sidewalks. We don't need government permission to protest, and the requirement does nothing to keep people in South Bruce Peninsula safe. We were involved in litigation in Whitehorse, where city council banned what they defined as microaggression, which is an unconscious thought that may harm another person's feelings. They banned those in the name of protecting the emotional safety of people at council meetings. They have repealed that. So far, thinking unconscious thoughts is still permitted in Whitehorse council meetings. And we're involved in litigation in Waterloo, where there is an anti-bullying law that bans mean words in the name of keeping people emotionally safe. And as I'm sure you have all noticed, there are these bubble zone laws that are expanding across the country. There's one in Calgary. There are several in Ontario that restrict protests near certain locations, libraries, community centers, and other public spaces, effectively allowing the government to pick and choose which topics can be protested. They have names like the Safe and Inclusive bylaw, quite Orwellian name, because it's actually about excluding people and their viewpoints from public spaces. And they are likely unconstitutional because they directly violate the content neutral principles of freedom of expression. Now, the Trudeau government was a master of using safety as a justification for limiting rights. In 2021, they listed every plastic manufactured item under the Environmental Protection Act as toxic. This includes children's toys, healthcare devices, protective helmets, like a hard hat, is made of plastic, car parts, computers. All of this happened via a single cabinet order without parliamentary debate. So thank you, Justin Trudeau, for keeping me safe from straws. He introduced Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act, which would have created something called a Digital Safety Commission, which is a new bureaucracy, because we need more of those, that would have enormous powers over social media, regulating things like bullying and hate speech, which has a subjective definition. And Bill C-63 would have included criminal code amendments that would have increased penalties for hate speech, created new offenses with up to life imprisonment. It included a statutory definition of hatred that is vague and highly subjective and would open the door to overcharging, having chilling effects on speech. And it could turn ordinary crimes into potential life sentences. Even more concerning was C-63 would have allowed for something called a preventative peace bond. A judge could impose a restriction on an individual who they viewed as reasonably likely to commit a hate crime, including a speech crime in the future. So those potential restrictions included house arrest, electronic monitoring with like a ankle bracelet, communications bans, and this could happen all without a crime having actually taken place. It's just the potential of a future crime. So imagine the chilling effect that that would have on ordinary Canadians who might express a controversial opinion. Fear of prosecution or even fear of a preemptive restraint becomes a tool to silence dissent before a single crime actually occurs. Now, C-63 mercifully died when Parliament was prorogued, but the new Mark Carney government has signaled that they are bringing back some key parts. Claiming that they need to keep Canadians safe from hate, the Carney government has introduced Bill C-9, the Combating Hate Act, which makes some really troubling changes to the criminal code. It repeals a safeguard that requires the attorneys general to consent to hate crime charges. So police can now charge on their own, and that removes a critical check against frivolous or politically motivated charges. The C-9 criminalizes the public display of certain symbols. Now, these are generally symbols that I do not like, I think are horrible. Includes things like the swastika, the SS lightning bolts. It includes terrorist insignia. Now, I understand a lot of members of the public like proposals like this, but historically, there's actually real social utility in knowing someone on your block is a Nazi. We're not safer because we do not know what someone's opinion is. And banning these symbols actually gives them a lot more power. It also forces them underground where people are more likely to then engage in sort of a spiral of extremism where they're only engaging with other extremist individuals. So I'm opposed to it from that perspective. And there was also the concern about creep. When we attended the technical briefing on the introduction of C-9, one of the first questions about which symbols were being banned was, why is the Confederate flag not on the list? So once you start down this road, the question becomes, where does it end? Another thing that C-9 would do is revive this standalone hate crime offense that elevates any criminal act that the Crown says is motivated by hatred into a separate offense with potential penalties of up to life imprisonment. It also, and I alluded to this before, it waters down the legal definition of hatred. The definition of hatred in Bill C-9 is detestation or vilification stronger than dislike or disdain. And it removes a critical part of the definition, which is from the case law, which requires an element of extremeness. The cases of Whatcott and Keegstra define hatred as the most extreme manifestation of those emotions. And it looks like the Mark Carney government is removing this part of the definition to deliberately lower the threshold and allow for more charges, more convictions, more prosecutions for speech-related offenses. uh, I think that there's this desire to move in the direction that the UK is heading in when it comes to the policing of speech in Canada. And we all know how much admiration Mark Carney has for all things British. And I think that this policing of speech is no exception. I think that he seems to have been inspired by a lot of the things that we're seeing there. So C9 is essentially a continuation of C63, bringing back the criminal provisions. And we know that that Digital Safety Commission that I mentioned, Minister Stephen Guilbeault has said that he plans to bring that aspect of the bill back separately. So this is going to result in Canadians facing a comprehensive web of legislation that threatens freedom of expression, all under the guise of keeping people safe from an amorphous definition of hatred, and to keep our feelings and emotions safe, which you have no entitlement to in a free and democratic society. A robust and resilient society is one where people can tolerate disagreement and being exposed to views with which they disagree. Now, there's also other changes in other pieces of legislation that this current government is proposing. It's not limited to speech. There's an expansion of surveillance powers in other pieces of legislation. Bill C2 was introduced earlier this year, and it had a number of really troubling provisions. For example, Bill C2, which is cybersecurity legislation, it would allow financial institutions to spy on transactions and report suspicious activity. It empowered Canada Post to open mail without warrants and safeguards. It allowed police to demand subscriber information from service providers without warrants. And it would prohibit cash transactions of over $10,000, which increases the traceability of transactions by government. Now, all of this was framed as necessary in the name of safety, but it really represented a profound intrusion into privacy and large expansion of surveillance. Fortunately, the government has backed down on this. They have reintroduced some of this as Bill C12, and they have removed those most egregious elements that I just mentioned. This was as a result of many civil liberties groups, including the Canadian Constitution Foundation, pushing back, and it shows that civic engagement can work. We had created an online portal that allowed Canadians to write to their MP. You put in your postal code, it would populate who your member of parliament was and suggest some things that you could say to your MP about what you were concerned about with C2. And hundreds of Canadians actually used the portal that we created to contact their MPs, demonstrating that resistance really can make a difference. So what can Canadians do? As I said, you can write to your MP. Tools like that portal are still active for other pieces of legislation. It's not just C2 and C9. There's also another bill, C8, that I won't get into. You can also take some of our online courses. You can learn the basics of constitutional law, freedom of speech, and privacy rights on our website at theccf.ca/learn, because you actually won't be in a good position to defend your rights if you don't really understand what they are or how they work. Another really important thing to do is, please, if you have children, if you have grandchildren, teach the next generation about the importance of civil liberties. Educators and parents can use resources like our online courses. We've developed a series of course packs that are available for free to teachers who want to teach their students about our Constitution. I've written a new children's book called Maple's Garden that instills in children the importance of the value of freedom of expression for children. And you can challenge the safety narrative. I mean, learn from history, recognize when governments are manipulating fear to gain power, question whether laws and regulations are truly necessary or if they're just performative, like that Nova Scotia fire ban. And these are not abstract ideas. They're actionable frameworks for every Canadian that they can engage in to challenge this type of overreach. I think the central lesson here is yes, safety is important, but it cannot be the highest and only goal of a free society. The safest society imaginable is a prison. It's a place where people cannot speak, move, or act freely. And safety without liberty is not security, it is oppression. So, true safety actually includes protecting freedom. It's our freedoms that make us resilient. They allow debate, dissent, innovation, and accountability for those people who are in power. Without these, we are vulnerable not just to things like crime and natural disasters, which of course are dangerous, but we become susceptible to the abuses of the state itself. And, we at the CCF repeatedly step into that breach. We challenge the Emergencies Act in court. We defend property owners against unjust civil forfeiture. We've opposed these unconstitutional bubble zones. We fight against arbitrary fines like that one that Kingston woman received from an unlawful search. But, the fight does not belong to lawyers like me alone. It belongs to every Canadian who believes that our rights are worth defending, including you. And I think that history teaches us this very well. Once freedom is lost, it's almost impossible to regain. So when governments are claiming they're prioritizing our safety, but their actions create fear and insecurity, they tell us things like we cannot gather, protest, speak, or enjoy public spaces without risking punishment. We really need to push back. And I want to leave you with this question. The next time a politician says we are limiting your rights for your safety, ask yourself whose safety and at what cost? Because vigilance is the price of liberty. If we value felt freedom, we need to be willing to defend it, even when it's uncomfortable, unpopular, inconvenient, because once it's lost, it's almost impossible to regain. So that's what I had to prepare to say tonight. I hope you found it entertaining and interesting. And I'm happy to take any questions. And I cannot provide legal advice, and nothing I say is legal advice. If you have your own legal question or problem, you need to consult your own lawyer.